r/AskReddit. Police officers of Reddit. What criminal actually impressed you with their criminal skills? We get a call reporting that the phone system of a major UK bank has been hacked and that the caller has had several £1,000s stolen from their account as a result. Seems unlikely, but officers went round to see what had happened. Obviously the bank's system was fine, but scammers had done something fairly clever. Turns out that there is a way in the UK of keeping a phone line open when only the recipient hangs up. The scammers called the victim and pretended to be from the bank before asking for account details. Victim was suspicious, so hung up and called the bank back at their real telephone number. However, the scammers held the line open and played a dial tone down the line, so the victim thought that she was making a new call. Then they played a ring sample before a new scammer answered the call and took the details pretending to be the bank. I've heard of it a few times since in the press, but the first time I came across it was on duty and no one had any idea what was going on. Not a police officer attorney, but this one is pretty good. We had a guy who ran one of those we buy your gold places. Typically he did a moderate business, but it just wasn't enough for the lifestyle he wanted. So he decided to rob a better jewelry store. He found one that sold only very high quality jewelry and was about 300 miles away from his house. He visited them one day and got the name of the safe they used, noted the type of alarm, cameras, etc. Then went home and bought the exact same safe. He spent months planning how to break into the safe without possibly tripping the alarm, but he wasn't having any luck. He was dedicated, kept working on it, and finally came up with a plan. He got his brother and another person, I can't remember relation, and they turned off their cell phones at home, then drove to the store. Got there in the middle of the night. They climbed onto the roof, cut a hole in the ceiling and purposefully tripped the alarm. They put the ceiling tiles back and laid down on the roof. The owner came and the police came. The owner checks out the store. Nothing looks wrong. Police haven't seen anyone, so the owner decided his alarm must have malfunctioned. He turns off the alarm because hey, he'll be back here in a couple hours to open. Sends the officer away and he goes home. The thief, able to hear the system is disabled from his hiding spot, then opens hole in the ceiling again. They casual cat drop into the business and basically wipe the place out. Estimates ran around 4-6 million in gold. They take all the gold home where he starts to slowly mix it in with his regular business. He melts all the gold down to sell, so it's not like the pieces can be identified. They generate some fake business receipts, but lots of his transactions are cash based, and a small business keeping sloppy records is nothing new. Meanwhile, the jewelry store owner feels like a complete idiot, and the cops only find one lone cigarette butt inside. No prints. They must have worn gloves. This police also get a security image from a business outside of a black truck coming and going at the right time, but the license plate is obscured and the thieves are covered up enough the poor quality camera can't catch much that's helpful. I believe the cigarette came back with a partial match to one of the sidekicks. Now mind you, a partial DNA match is pretty mediocre evidence at best, even though juries love even partial DNA that gets the police looking in the right direction. The IRS has noticed how the thief doubled his income that year, and then the next year had a slump, but somehow managed to buy a whole heaping lot of stuff with cash that had to be unreported. He bought a Land Rover, some sports car, can't remember type, a 400k house, a 30k pool, all with cash that was unaccounted for. A check of cell phone records had one of the cell phones pinging about an hour away from the crime scene in the middle of the night. And the truck he had was the same type of truck that showed up at the scene, because one of them turned his phone on and called his wife to tell her he was out with said guys, but at a bar. It was a lot of little things, but it was enough altogether to make a pretty decent case, and a jury convicted him at trial. Edit. There are some other evidentiary pieces I know I can't remember, but overall he did a surprising amount of planning but just got too excited with his spending laundering of gold. Once had a guy who shoplifted on an industrial scale. He stole hundreds and sometimes thousands of pounds worth of merchandise from a particular well-known high street clothing store. Every day, he'd go to different branches all over the country, UK obviously. He spoke nicely and was smartly dressed. He just used to fill up bags with high value products and walk out. He had a warehouse type unit somewhere. Police never found it, with his own till. because he would generate till receipts for these items and go back to return them at a different branch and get cash refunds. He was at it for years, made enough to put his kids through private school. When he got caught he was jailed for about a year. Our shoplifting sentencing guidelines are absurdly low. When he came out he got back on it. Police still couldn't find his base. He was being investigated and was on bail. One occasion when he answered his bail at the police station, the police had a 6-man surveillance team ready to tail him and track down the warehouse he was using. He lost them within 2 minutes of leaving the station. When he came for trial based on the CCTV evidence we had from the various shops, the case got thrown out. The footage wasn't good enough to make out his features exactly, and the officer who purported to identify him hadn't followed procedures. After he was thus acquitted he was due to be investigated for some other matters, but he gave the police and security the slip from the court before he could be arrested. Even I was impressed, and I was prosecuting him. I am a police officer, but the story is actually from my dad, who was a lawyer. He had a couple of guys who had scratch built an ATM. This would have been back in the 80s, before the days of skimmers and cameras to clone cards. So they built their own ATM and installed it in a wall on a public street in order to collect card details to use later on. I don't know if it actually dispensed money. I'm guessing it just showed an error message. He told me that very occasionally he had come across criminals who had worked so hard for their spoils that he felt they had kind of earned them. These guys were his example. He was also confused that 2 people smart enough to do this chose not to make an honest living. I'm not a police officer, but know some guys who are. Best one I heard was a guy who would drill a tiny hole beside a window to open the latch. He would then enter at night and go straight to the front door and open it, so he could make a quick exit if needed. If he couldn't open a door, he would leave again immediately. He stole stuff, then closed the window and locked the door behind him. Most people had no idea they had been robbed. He took wallets off bedside desks while people slept beside them, or sometimes just took some cash and cards but left the wallet. When he got caught, he was making a plea deal, so it was in his interest to admit all crimes so he couldn't later be prosecuted again for them. He took police round dozens of houses, and each had a tiny drill hole, and every house owner thought they had lost wallets and credit cards, never knowing they had been burgled. Stupidest one. A kid broke into his school at night and stole 10 laptops. It was snowing that night. Police came when the alarm went off, and there was one set of footprints in the snow that led them from the school the whole way to the kid's front door. When I was a rookie I got a call at 3 AM one night about a hold-up alarm going off at an ATM. I respond and don't really take the call that seriously at first because I'm thinking, no way a hold-up alarm is being triggered at 3 in the morning. I get there and start checking the bank when I see a guy walking through the drive-thru. Stupid me strolls over and calmly says, "Hey man, come over here and talk to me for a minute." He bolts and I take off after him only to realize I left my handheld in my car. I run back and call it in and my partner shows up shortly after. Well, we can't find the guy and start looking around. The guy spray painted the ATM camera and the drive-thru camera, which set off the alarm. About an hour later I see a vehicle with out-of-state tags driving slowly through the drive-thru, and after running the plate, he has fictitious tags. We search the vehicle and can find absolutely nothing but a very long tree branch in the back of the SUV. We write him for fictitious tags and send him on his way per my sergeant. The next day my investigator gets a call from the FBI because I had this guy's name flagged and saw where we ran him. He had been hitting ATMs in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas and Tennessee. We were the first department that actually came in contact with him. He would spray paint the cameras or use the tree branch to turn high cameras away. After the alarms go off, he would wait nearby for police to leave. He would then come back and saw the hinges off the ATMs and take the money. He stole approximately $150,000 over a 6-month period. He was caught a few weeks later by a guy I went to the academy with. Hatton Garden heist is my favorite. Huge water-cooled drill. 50 centimeters of concrete, all dressed as builders. Safety deposit boxes totaling £14 million were robbed and they rolled them out wearing overalls, in wheelie bins. A proper movie-worthy heist. Not a cop, but a cop told me about this. Evidently there were these 2 twin brothers. Big, tall, muscular fellows. Their scam was ingenious. Both brothers would go into Home Depot separately and each begin shopping, filling up his cart with high value stuff, each filling up his cart with identical items. The first brother would go to the cashier and legally pay for his purchases. He'd show his receipt at the door and take his purchases out of the store. The second brother would hang around the entrance, far enough from the exit not to arouse suspicion. The first brother would take his car to the entrance and give the receipt to the second brother. First dude then takes his purchases to load up in their vehicle. Second brother then takes the cart full of items, plus receipt, back to the returns counter and says he changed his mind and wants his money back. Home Depot would refund the purchases. Dude basically just sold Home Depot their own items. Evidently they pulled this trick off and on for years before someone caught on. Cops said they probably would have kept on getting away with it for years if they hadn't hit the same store so often. Edit. Corrected my error as pointed out by u/Thaxerabinks. I was an MP at Fort Carson. The young man was in the service for 2 years before a dishonorable discharge sending him back home to Pennsylvania. When he got home he used his uniform to get discounts and praise. One day he decided to hop on a plane to Colorado. He arrives in full uniform but with lieutenant rank on. Gets off the plane and uses the government transportation to get on base. He doesn't have an ID but shit he is an officer so they let him on. Then he stayed at the in-processing barracks without paperwork because hell, he is an officer. Stays there for weeks. He goes walking to the PX and comes across a woman with a flat tire. He helps her change it out and she invites him over for dinner. There he meets her husband and their kids, then convinces them that he is waiting for housing and they let him live with them for a month. He cleans the house and babysits the kids. One time he went to this guy's unit and chewed a supply sergeant out to help the guy he was living with. The only reason this came to light is because of one phone call he made to his mother from the in-processing barracks. She became worried about him and called them. His mother let the people know he was not in the military. After that the search began. I was an MPI and got to pick him up. He gave me a straightforward statement and was genuinely nice. I just remember sitting on the office couch with him watching TV waiting for him to get transferred from my custody. I told him that I was genuinely impressed and that after whatever happens to him, happens, that he could get it together and do well. He wasn't the brightest kid but damn he had balls. I guess that is what it really takes. This guy in high school, we'll call him Luis, was a known drug dealer. He didn't make it a secret. Everyone bought weed and harder stuff off of him. The cops constantly pulled him over to search him, and whenever a drug related thing happened at school he was often the first kid they pulled into the principal's office. But they would never catch him with any drugs. The principal used to turn all of his possessions inside out on a weekly basis. Apparently schools can do that, but cops can't. They regularly cut locks off his gym locker and his regular locker in hopes of finding his stash, but they never found it. One time there was a rumor going around that his stash was stored in a locker not assigned to anyone, which prompted the administration to search every single locker in the school. I remember we had to stand in the hallway and unlock it so the principal could have a look inside. They definitely caught people with drugs but not the Luis. Turns out he started that rumor. Drug dogs were a regular occurrence. Once a month they brought them into the school, and they were present at every sports game. Luis was one of the only, if not the sole supplier for the whole school. The administration had no idea what to do. They would catch kids with weed and the kids would flat out say I bought this from Luis. Luis would encourage them to say it. They would then flip Luis shit inside out. Cops would search his car, and he consented to all of it, and laughed when they found nothing. This was probably close to 15 years ago now. The vice principal loves to tell the story about how they eventually caught him. VP's younger son asked for these shoes for Christmas that had a secret compartment in them. Light bulbs go off in his head. The first day back after holiday break, he calls the school's dare officer and pulls Luis out of class. They bring him into the office and flip all of his shit out on the table. Then the VP tells him to take his shoes off. Turns out his hunch was right. He had hidden compartments in his shoes, but there were no drugs in there. I guess Luis is laughing his ass off at this point. This was pre-everyone owned a cell phone era. Luis has the audacity to explain that he hasn't seen any of his classmates for 3 weeks. He had not taken any orders yet. Had the VP waited a day, he would have caught him. Edit. A lot of people want to know what happened to Luis. From what I can recall, He had been arrested a few times on small charges, cleaned his act up, had 2 kids, got married, and is now GM of the most profitable Taco Bell on the East Coast. Had a guy when I first started would twist locks. The art of twisting a lock works mainly in businesses that secure their double front doors using a deadbolt style lock. He would use a tool to twist this lock and in turn open the doors. Guy probably got away with 25 businesses before he was finally busted. He later said his style of breaking and entering worked so well because the alarm systems have a set delay when opening a business, say 30 seconds. Given the glass wasn't broke or large movements were observed by the system, it would act as if the store were opening and give the employee time to reset the alarm. Those 30s were plenty for him to get in, get to the register, and leave. Ex-cop, Australia. 3 guys rolled up to construction site in the CBD and stole all the giant rolls of copper wire. They drove up with high-vis PPE gear on and told the project manager he'd been delivered the wrong gauge, I guess. He workers helped them load it and they left. A fire marshal once told me about his nemesis, a firebug naturally. Apparently the arsonist had a thing for burning old barns. Never a building that was in use, always an old abandoned one. Anyway, his modus operandi was to take a balloon filled with accelerant like gasoline or kerosene and suspend it by a string at 20 ft plus off the ground. Under the balloon he'd light a candle and start the balloon swinging on a long arc. He'd have a good 20 plus minutes before the arc of the swing slowed enough that the candle would ignite the balloon. The balloon ignites. The accelerant is spread evenly across all surfaces in the balloon. String and candle disappear in the fire. It was like the entire interior of the structure caught fire at the same time. With no trace as to how, he said it was damn near the perfect crime. Until some cop happens to notice a car parked in a field a mile away and thinks to jot down the license plate number. One of the guys I know escaped from a new prison by climbing the fence. He was always great at climbing things. He would get to the tops of pine trees no trouble. When he was running from the police helicopter he had underneath a shed with hay bales inside it. This gave off a heat signal so they couldn't pick up where he was. He ran the same loop. This was to make the dog handlers think the dog had got onto a false positive. He was found hiding in someone's cupboard eating their food about 2 weeks after escaping from prison. I locked up a guy a few years ago and he had an unusual crime on his criminal history, theft of an ATM. I asked him about it and he told me he was with 4 others and they all turned up at a local bank in overalls with a large truck. They asked for the manager and told him we're here to repair the ATM. The manager helped them load the ATM onto the truck, full of cash, and they drove away. He got snapped when his girlfriend got mad and turned him in. Somewhat relevant. And friend of my father's ducked up royally a few years back, was driving home drunk and hit a parked car about 2 blocks away from home. Not a good situation, right? Didn't freak out, just got out and walked the rest of the way home. Woke up a couple of hours later and reported his car missing. Police showed up a few hours later saying the thieves didn't get far, but his car was wrecked. He thanked them for finding it and got information about where it was. Small town at the time and no one suspected a thing. Got off completely free. Smartest criminal. Suspect would go door to door saying he was with Publishers Clearinghouse. He would tell people they were one of several finalists. He then explained he would need their name, date of birth, and social security number to verify who they were. After that, he would ask what hours they weren't home so they could ensure if the victim won the prize, they would be home. Naturally, he would break into their homes when they weren't home and steal all their valuables. To top it off, he would steal their identity and open a bunch of credit card payday loans in their names afterwards. After over 50 cases, I finally caught the guy. Made off with over $500,000 in 3 months before he was caught. Dumbest criminal. Suspect was robbing a gas station late at night. Suspect pointed a gun at the cashier demanding money. The cashier was surrounded by plexiglass all around. Cashier refused to give suspect the money and hit the panic alarm, which locked the door. Suspect was angry and fired a shot at the cashier. The bullet ricocheted off the plexiglass and struck him in the forehead. The bullet knocked him unconscious but didn't penetrate the skull. As I arrived, the bullet was still protruding from his forehead and he was knocked out. He got 99 years for his stupidity. The best part was the cash register only had $60 in it. Not a cop, nor the criminal, but in the Blue Mountains of NSW, Australia, my now deceased uncle went on a string of armed robberies where he would run into a store with a gun, then shove the attendant against the wall and superglue their hands to the wall before stealing the money in the cash register. He had no intentions of using the gun, and it was actually never loaded. He just thought it would be funny to glue people to the wall and steal their shit. Although no skill was really involved, I arrested a kid for stealing a car. He confessed and told me that he'd be straight up with me. He was walking through a parking lot and saw a lady drop her car keys and keep walking. He said that's her fault for not paying attention, grabbed the keys, and took off in her car. He lamented that he knew he'd get stopped eventually, but didn't think we'd stop him so quickly. When I asked if he had a driver's license, he smiled and said he was planning to take the car he stole to the DMV so he could take his driving test. We both had a good laugh at that. He said I ruined his plans. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.